What's going on, Workforce? Brian and Chris here, and today we're talking about the Criterion Dungeons. This is the new form of scalable dungeons that Yoshi-P teased at the recent Live Letter 68. Now, being that this is, it's a very vague kind of idea that has been presented to us. They're scalable dungeons, 1 to 4 man, and I've seen a lot of discussion online. We thought we'd kind of just jump into the conversation here with kind of our thoughts, but also kind of that message of kind of like Island Sanctuary, like they kind of present an idea, and sometimes that idea can become bigger than it ever was intended. So we always try to say like, hey, we're speculating. We don't want to set you off on a path that ends up, like disappointing you down the future. But Chris, let's jump into it.
So I thought it was Deep Dungeons at first when they said that it had dungeon in it, it had scalable in it, 1 to 4 man. It's meant to be, the difficulty should be relatively high. It's meant to be challenging. I immediately assumed Deep Dungeon. That is not what this is. We are getting a Deep Dungeon in 6.3. So whatever it is, it's not a Deep Dungeon. We're getting 3 of them. This could either be, in my mind, something like Unreal's, where they're going to bring back old dungeons in a form. But then why would we get 3 of them numbered out? So that doesn't make sense. Or this could be some new form of content. There were some people saying that some part of the Japanese they felt translated to like collection or something like that. I don't speak Japanese, so I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what this is. Is it Fractal and Mythic Plus? Are now Lost Ark terminology has to be in the mix? Is it Chaos Dungeons? Have you done Chaos Dungeons yet?
I'm almost level 30. I gotta log in and make my guild donation so we can keep leveling up the guild in Lost Ark. But so the thing I'm gonna IQ in on is obviously scalable, meaning that it's flexible between 1 and 4, which essentially, like when we talk about what was interesting about Deep Dungeon, is how people took the content and started making their own challenge content out of it. So the idea is that could you consider like a 1-man dungeon kind of, trial essentially with the Criterion Dungeons? Like that could be something very interesting to see players take on. When it talks about scalable, does it mean that we don't care about roles at that point? Like you're like, all right, maybe bring a healer, maybe not. We don't care. Like we're just, this is just that content. I hope that we get to see some kind of systems that then support this dungeon system. So from a speculative perspective, if it is scalable between 1 and 4, does that mean they bring in flexibility to you as a player? Because if you are not bringing a tank, you are not bringing a healer or something of that nature, do we start to see the influence of Bajia with lost actions coming into the system to kind of help you as a player have that level of flexibility? I think that's something that could be fascinating to see, with the fact that it's also scalable in terms of that. Does this offset the fact that we've kind of gone to this 1 dungeon per patch cycle? And so when you look at the vast, like one of the things is like, we have a wealth of dungeons in this game that go unused at all. And they're amazing dungeons. Can we take those set pieces and build a system on top of that that's unique and different? And I think that could be the case. And the fact is that when they made the announcement that we are getting a deep dungeon and this is something separate, it's not like we're like, oh well, we would have had a deep dungeon, but we're going with this system instead. No, we're actually going to have both. And I think this could be a piece of interesting content that, like, as long as it adheres to the rules that Yoshi-P sets, that you don't feel like you have to go do your Criterion Dungeons, your roulettes, this other system, just so that you can be ready to raid on the weekend. Like, as long as it's its own progression, if they add in any kind of progression to it, and it's not required to be a part of like the another system, then I think you end up having a healthy gamer mindset to it, because it becomes just like Preach in his video saying, optional endgame. It's not mandatory endgame, it's optional endgame, which I think is players are seeing that there's a healthy relationship with the fact that it's optional, so that you're not sitting here going like, oh my gosh, I just turned this game of mine into a job, because in order to play with my friends or my raid group, there's all these requirements that I have to hit going into it.
Right, and constant requirements. One-time requirements are in this game. You have to get through MSQ. You have to get your gear up once. The most recent time, it's kind of a catch-up thing, so it's always just whatever the most recent gear grind is. So there's a one-time cost. Guild Wars has an expansion coming out on the 28th, and so I've been kind of playing the game a little more each week, And like, I'm finding myself aware of the number of like one-time things I still don't have done that would be really helpful as I've kind of joined a raid group. And I was going to go ahead and raid in that game. And so like, as I do that, I'm aware of the one-time thing, but that's very different than like, okay, but do I need to be doing this forever? No. And so Final Fantasy stays much more in that camp. That this could grant experience, it could grant tomes, and so that would make it feel like it's part of, I guess, the circulation of grind for newer players. But players who've been around a while, they've finished leveling all the jobs that they want to level. And capping tomes is either something they've decided they don't want to do, or they already do through running one expert roulette a couple of days a week, or whatever the method is they prefer. This really just adds more ways to play. If it is like Deep Dungeon, hopefully it's more than 3 saves if it's something that's partial, or it's something that can be finished in one sitting. If it is meant to be scalable, to be challenging, I'm hopeful that there's something about it that allows us to add modifiers, or there's rotating modifiers, or something that allows the difficulty to increase. Because if the goal is just to play it for play's sake, I hope that there's the ability to scale it past the skill level that I can clear on day one. I appreciate how approachable Final Fantasy is, but with the exception of Savage, Extreme, and Ultimate, basically with the exception of 8-man content, there's very little in this game that you can't clear day one. Which Yoshi-P said during this last live letter that his goal with the difficulty that he's found his sweet spot tends to be is that like you do get your clear, but you go, oh, that wasn't so bad. And so it's nice. It would be nice to have the optional things that you could queue in for when you do want it to be bad. You do want it to be rough and something that you earn, because constantly having everything be kind of the difficulty consistency of like applesauce, at some point you want something that has a little more to chew on.
A little bite to it. I definitely agree, but I think when it comes down to difficulty, one of the things I've longed for is difficulty that scales to the player. And obviously they're talking about scalable content in terms of party size. That gives you the flexibility, but you're right. Like, okay, you've beaten it. Hey, can you beat it now when the enemies are a little bit higher level? That's just a simple stat boost. Eventually that's going to get boring, and that's why you bring up modifiers, and that those modifiers themselves add a little variety to the piece of content, because that, you could change them every week. You could say, hey, this is what's more challenging, and it could be a buff or a hindrance to you. It could be a buff to the enemies or a hindrance. Like there's all kinds of things that when we talk about modifiers, we've seen them at work in multiple games. But our Deep Dungeon system is a good variety of that, right? Hey, everybody's sprinting now. Like, okay, that's a fun little perk. But now you can see here that the enemies are stronger, or they're going to explode when you kill them, and then you're going to have to adjust your strategies. One of the cool things about that is that if you have it paired with obviously player choice, you can end up having various different builds for that piece of content. But let's not deny the fact that when you have challenging content, you end up finding and bringing out like people who tend to be a little bit more abrasive, and it could cause a little bit of frustration and stress. And so that's where it's like, ultimately, when it comes down to that, I prefer that if they do have that kind of it and it does scale, cut matchmaking from it completely. You want to run it a solo? Cool. You want to run it with a friend? Great. We've got that for you, but we're not going to match you up. And turns out like you get in there like, how could you not have the sword of truth? Everybody needs the sword of truth to get through this phase. Like that's where you run into, like that. And then I would say like, it would be really kick butt if they all of a sudden said, hey, Blue Mage is compatible, or hey, we're going to add these systems that are compatible so that you can take on this content any way you want. It's literally, we're making this playground for you, and go nuts, have fun, and make it your own. And that's where I think this announcement it is the most ethereal, like just what we had with the Island Sanctuary. Like, oh man, that's what I've wanted in this game.
Yep.
Maybe, I hope that it's what I've wanted in this game. Ultimately, when they deliver it, it's going to prove yes or no. It's going to prove if, oh, that thing I've been saying I've been wanting for expansion over expansion over expansion's finally here. And then either Brian's like, oh my gosh, this is the perfect, this is what it's been missing. Or it ends up being like, well, it's close.
What's nice about Island Sanctuary and Criterion Dungeons is that they have already shown us the list of what's going to be in each patch, and both of them are getting updates this expansion.
Mm-hmm.
And so what was hard about Blue Mage is when we got it, we got all the way to level, was it 50 at first?
Yeah.
Even though they'd already designed the 60 and 70 skills. So we were making up our mind whether or not we liked the content. And like, that's not even feedback they can act on, because like they know what we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're like, well, it doesn't even do this, they're like, okay, but it will. Like it's really hard to kind of parse our feedback as far as like, will it just fix itself, or is there something we need to actually change? And so with Island Sanctuary and Criterion, what's nice is to know that they're going to be getting multiple data points throughout this expansion, and that the 0.2 knowledge is going to be inherently flawed because they've already designed Criterion, or at least have a rough outline of Criterion Dungeon number 2 and 3, and they've already designed expansions to Island Sanctuary. So people get in, they go, well, there's not enough here. Okay, but there will be. Like, or like, I love exactly this amount. Okay, but they're adding more. Like, so it's nice to know that this content's really going to mature. Sometimes in the game, we have content that comes into the game and then does not get updated for a substantial amount of time. And I think it does that content a little bit of a disservice as opposed to a more consistent patch schedule, at least while it's new content. So I think it's really exciting to see both of these. I guess more like, okay, you're done with your story. You've already decided whether or not you want to do all the Savage and Extreme kind of 8-man stuff. Let's create some more like approachable mid-core things for people that are in groups of 4 or less, all the way down to especially a lot of that solo content for when you're just killing time.
Absolutely. Well, guys, just the question is to you: what are you interested or most excited about learning about the Criterion Dungeons, and what are your hopes for the system itself? Again, remember that this is still very like vague in terms of what that's been announced, so it's fine to speculate. Just keep in mind that it is speculation until it becomes more solid, and obviously when it does, we'll be able to kind of follow it up. Does this meet some of our expectations? Is this the content that we see helping improve the overall flow of the multiplayer side of 14, or is this just a nice piece, and we're so glad to be able to highlight it as a kind of a feature of the game that players can take part in. Like you said, and like I kind of reiterate, like I don't think they need to design unique dungeons. I'd love them to use the palettes and the stuff that they've already created. And if they want to go and make some changes to them for this specifically, that's fine. But with the new deep dungeon, I'm happy that I'll have to be able to experience it at a level cap character with this. Like I like being able to use my full skill set. And then instead, and since it doesn't seem like we'll ever have it to where we could do that in lower dungeons at the time being, like just give me the ability to go back to them and play around in the space as a high level powered character and have some fun with it. All right, Chris, why don't you send us off?
Well, we're going to keep talking about all this massive news that came out that doesn't really explain the next 10 years, but does pretty detailed explain the next 2 years of Final Fantasy and some massive changes. So let us know down below what other parts of the live letter you enjoyed, and we'll see you next time.
Take care.